Hey, everyone. I am delighted to be with another guest that we are excited to feature and get a conversation going with around our upcoming event this Thursday here in Chicago. And I'm going to throw it over to them to introduce themselves in just a moment. But before I do that, for those who don't know me, I am Cassandra Quinn, and I am a part of the volunteer leadership team for the Chicago chapter of Conscious Capitalism. And I am also serving as Beyond Zero, which is our featured event this week, Impact Partner Liaison, which is why I have the privilege to have this conversation. And I will throw it over to our guest to introduce himself.
Hey y'all. Yeah, thanks, Cassandra. It's nice to meet you. I'm happy to be here. My name is Shea. I'm the manager of North American Sustainability at Interface. I'm very, very happy to be celebrating, actually celebrating about 5.5 years of being an employee, but much longer than that being a fan of Interface, of the Ray Anderson legacy, of the story. What would you like me to share, Cassandra, in terms of just my role or work?
Yeah. Tell us a little. I know that you have been in a few different roles throughout your time with Interface, and you're newer to the current role. Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, and it probably looks on paper like I'm maybe newer than functionally I have been. Our team has been kind of trying to we like to describe it as trying to shape and develop the markets that we want to sell into, to add levels of sophistication around sustainability and kind of difficult questions to ask suppliers, because we know we have good answers to those questions, and we want our customers and consumers to be more and more kind of elevated with what they demand from their partners. But I'll get to that in a bit. So yeah, I mentioned I started 5 years ago, and I actually started on a small piece of our marketing team that was called Customer Experience, which was really more of a hospitality team than anything. So customer experience at some brands is, everything that the customer sees or touches. We weren't really that comprehensive. It was much more about meal visits, about facilities visits, taking customers, that salespeople around North America, really, although occasionally internationally, would bring to our manufacturing facilities and our headquarters building in Atlanta. And I came from the nonprofit world. I kind of was in a building science and advocacy kind of space before I joined Interface. And it was a really great way for me to learn who our customers are, who I build a network within the company, learn about some of the business processes, and actually like how stuff gets made. So it was a really cool place to begin. But I joined Interface 100% because I was, passionate about the mission and curious about whether a global for-profit enterprise could ever do anything other than damage the planet, which I think we are kind of knocking on the door of being able to answer. And so I switched in 2020, just before everything shut down, to being a member of Lisa Conway's sustainability team. She's our global VP now of market sustainability, and she was the head of the Americas business. And so the recent title change that you were talking about is, as she was elevated to a global role, she has now more direct reports, and I just kind of have a standardized title with more people who do an equivalent job to me abroad. But I like to describe the work that we do in how I said, which is, we're trying to shape markets to be more receptive and demand more out of suppliers from what we consider to be the kind of business purpose and that sustainability impact, right? And I like to highlight that and then frame it in that way, because that is a commercialization plan. That is a kind of strategic sales type role. But we very rarely treat sustainability as one of those business differentiators that can actually win, right? So think about a startup that comes into a new industry and says, well, I can make pencils in half the time that Big Pencil can make them. So you're going to go to customers and say, I'm going to make speed matter to the market. I'm going to make order turnaround time matter, right? But we never hear, I can make those pencils with half the raw materials.
Mm-hmm.
So why are you not asking about how efficient this process is, right? And I like to think about it that way, because fundamentally, that's what I believe we're doing. And if you think about it that way, it has nothing to do with flooring. It has nothing to do with our industry. And it is a potential a way that, again, we can win. I think this is kind of the heart of conscious capitalism as a movement, with purpose alongside profit motive, rather than one independent and the other kind of as a charity project, which is the danger, right?
Yeah. And I think that just understanding the role of the work that you're doing is in shifting consciousness towards this matters, and it should matter to the market. And this is what we are hopefully creating that critical mass tipping point, right, where people come to expect not just those standard things that sometimes people are differentiating with, like speed, like price, whatever, but really that something like sustainability or rejuvenation, even restorative practices, which I know is important to Interface as well, really can be at the forefront of what matters to the market, right? So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. For those who may not know really kind of the ins and outs about why Joey and I are here having this conversation, like I mentioned at the very beginning, we are actually for the Chicago chapter of Conscious Capitalism, partnering with several conscious businesses and being able to host the Chicago premiere of the award-winning documentary Beyond Zero, which actually follows the journey of that evolution for Interface. And so that's what's special and unique about this particular impact partner, is they are also the star of the show, right? But what is really unique, and I got to learn from Nathan when we spoke the other day, is that though the story centers on using Interface as that case study, it was a completely independently funded film, just because it caught his heart and attention the same way the Interface caught your attention and heart, and why you came to work for them in the first place. So I thought that was really fascinating. But for those who are in Chicago or could be in Chicago by Thursday, like Joey will be, to be able to join us, we're actually doing a screening of the film. Like I said, it is the Chicago premiere of it, and that's going to be at the Karen Center. And I'll drop some links to be able to allow people to grab up those to learn more about the event, buy tickets, learn more about being an impact partner, because that is how we're able to actually do the second part of really what this event is all about, which is the launch of the Beyond Zero conscious business curriculum. And so that is a curriculum that is being developed by Nathan and being able to be made available to right now college and high school level educators, mostly focused on the higher ed, and making that available for no cost to the educator or to the institution. And that's why it's super important, the work that both our chapter is doing and the partnership between our impact partners and how they're contributing. So that's a little context about what's going on. So like I said, that's what the event is, but really we're here to talk about that bigger picture. I know we already got the conversation started about who Interface is, but is there anything else that we should know about Interface and the work that you're doing right now that we haven't touched on yet?
Probably many things, but I mean, fundamentally, I guess, if you don't know the brand, and I don't expect you to unless you're an architect or a designer, to be honest, Interface is a global commercial flooring manufacturer. We're about $1.4 billion in revenue. We have about 3,600 employees globally. And we were founded in 1973 by a man named Ray Anderson. And I want to put a fine point on this. We're really not that big of a company. If you know much about publicly traded companies, that is, we are one small element of one small business unit at some of those institutions, right? But we've had really an outsized influence and impact on really proving a model of quote unquote sustainable business, or use the word regenerative or rejuvenative, restorative. That is ultimately the goal, where we have a stated public goal to be a restorative enterprise, meaning a carbon negative, a carbon sequestering enterprise, and also have other kind of social positive impacts and I would say ecosystem benefits, right? Just through running our business by the year 2040. And we're going to pursue that goal without purchasing offsets. We are going to, offsets are not part of that accounting, right? We're thinking really hard about what that means and what that looks like. And frankly, it's exactly in line with what Ray Anderson's epiphany in 1995, this is the subject of the film, so I'm not spoiling a whole lot, but you should know what you're getting into if you join us on Thursday evening, was the idea of trying to eliminate our environmental footprint everywhere in the world that we did business. And that was what we originally called Mission Zero. But we actually set our sights higher because we had made so much progress toward that goal and had eliminated so many elements of our environmental impact and had influenced so many other businesses to follow even a little bit in our footsteps, that we decided to kind of raise the stakes a little bit on ourselves, and pursue what we called the climate take back business plan, which was we called the business plan to reversing global warming. And that is putting us on that trajectory of becoming a restorative or regenerative company. We also have a 2030 science-based target that's been approved, which is going to be super hard to achieve. And it's only 5.5 years away at this point, right? So there's a huge amount of work left to be done. But what I love about this place is we have this tremendous legacy and history, and we are consistently pushing ourselves to do what we know needs to be next, what we know the world needs, what we know society needs, which is kind of ever evolving and ever elevating. And so there's a lot left to do. But even though we're a small company, we have those ambitions and have some pretty impressive stories to tell, which is what I won't spoil from the film.
Yeah, I love it. And I think that that's such great context to just frame up the rest of our conversation without giving too much away. And I think it's interesting because depending on whose perspective I think that sometimes when you think about a publicly traded company or a company that is, 1.4 billion, a lot of average folks might say, oh, wow, that's a big company. But when, like you said, when you start getting into the really big global picture, interface is quite small in that arena, right? So I think it's quite impressive that it's been able to be such a global leader in the ways that it has. And I think one of the things I was really excited about when I was preparing for our conversation and the event coming up on Thursday was also that I believe Interface got a UN award in 2020. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we were recognized for kind of climate action as a business, which absolutely you're right, remarkable for a small commercial flooring manufacturer to be recognized in this way. And ultimately, we were recognized for creating carbon negative product without any offsets accounted for. So what I mean by that is cradle to gate, which is the life cycle assessment based term to describe the full supply chain. So that's raw material extraction, the material processing, and then the final manufacturing stage, which is the only thing that we actually own in that whole description, right? We actually have a product that holds more carbon in the body of its material than was emitted to produce it. So that's what we mean when we say a carbon negative product. And we the movie does go through some of the steps to commercializing that. I don't want to call it a technology, but that supply chain, that process, some of that material. And it really revealed for us, it really changed our mindset because it proved to us that it is possible to run a business that could sell a thing, right? That could command some amount of dollars in the marketplace that can actually, the more of it you sell, the more carbon comes out of the atmosphere. So again, talk about fusing your purpose as an organization or a company with your commercial interests, right? We talk about these big, scary topics like decoupling, this idea that businesses need to remove their reliance on emissions or environmental damage to pursue profit. There's very little model for that out there, but this is a product, and really it's a family of products. And at this point, it's been commercialized to a much broader portion of our portfolio, because that was 4 years ago now, right? We can actually say this is a regenerative product, at least just from the climate standpoint. And so the UN recognized that as the leadership position that I believe that it is. And to your point, less about our competitor set in flooring, less about even manufacturing, but more about, okay, if we can have carbon negative carpet tile, and I guarantee you, take it from me, nobody was asking for that, right? Then where else can we have carbon sequestering products or material? What is the limit of that kind of innovation, that invention, and that ingenuity? And that's what gets me the most hopeful and excited, and gives me a different level of expectation about business, where it can actually be an engine for positivity, for kind of transforming us into the future that we want, and pursuing purpose beyond exclusively profit. That will always be part of the equation. But to the extent that profit is the only metric that we measure and deem as success, then we will always be in opposition to a world of finite resources. And that's the fundamental challenge that we face and that we are bumping up against here in the 21st century, right? And that's why I'm so thrilled and happy about Interface's progress, but also our honesty and authenticity about how much we have left to do.
Yeah, and I think that what's exciting about Beyond Zero as a documentary, from my understanding, because Thursday is going to be my first opportunity to see
Yeah.
it in its totality, but is that it does give this great case study that people can model and learn from. However, it's not like Interface arrived and was like, okay, we've done the thing, check the box. It is like, what is next? What is next? What is next? And so this ends up getting to be just a snapshot. And to your point, several year old snapshot as things continue to evolve and change, which I think is really exciting. And I know in the conversation that we we're having just a few minutes before we went live, we were talking about the ripple effects of the work the Interface has done. And so I'm curious if you would just like share with our audience, what significance does the Chicago premiere itself have or hold for Interface and its commitment to sustainability? Or what are the things that are like exciting about this particular launch of this conversation?
Sure. Well, so Interface is headquartered in Atlanta. I'm actually at our manufacturing base here in LaGrange, which is West Georgia. And it's significant that we continue to spread this story to as many audiences, networks, and different markets as possible. But maybe somewhat ironically, it actually is kind of surprising to me that this is the premiere of this film, because Chicago has been a really crucial city in the flooring world and in the carpet world for a long time. And so we have a long relationship with Chicago and that market. And it's been a really core part of the engine of our business in the Americas. And so I'm thrilled. But also, I think just any major center of commerce and business, of course, Chicago being one, we need to shake up, those expectations and that those networks and shake some complacency from just the kind of typical status quo. And I think there is a way to do that that is scary or hard to watch or aggressive, right? And that's the typical path that, as I was sharing to you earlier, I think that the environmental movement kind of pulls those levers way too often. And I say that as somebody who fully wholeheartedly counts himself in that number. But there's also the lever of inspiration, of positivity, of joy. And one of the lessons that I've learned actually as an employee here is how crucial it is to be having fun while you're doing this type of heavy work. And I want to bring all those elements through, this story to the Chicago community. And I think it's going to be really well received, because it is much less a movie about a carpet business. It is much less than that, a movie about sustainability. It's really a movie about what is business intended to do, and how big can we dream about that impact. One of my favorite quotes from Ray Anderson, again, the founder of the company, is if you believe that businesses exist to make a profit, I would submit to you that they profit to exist, and surely they must exist for some higher and nobler purpose than that, right? So it's asking, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah.
You profit to stay in business, but what are you in business to do?
Yeah.
And that is such a simple but really radical and provocative question that I look forward to sharing with the Chicago community, and just hearing kind of again how that ripple effect plays out, because the business model, the type of work that you do, the role that you have matters zero in that conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I think that to tie back to something you shared at the beginning of the conversation on a thread that I just want to pull on a little bit about your personal journey. I know that you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, prior to being at Interface, you were in the nonprofit world, and then was drawn to Interface and its mission. But you also mentioned that and you may have not used the word skepticism, but that's the word that was in my brain, curiosity, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I said curiosity, but skepticism was also there for sure.
About how is it possible for a for-profit company to really create this kind of identity around values and purpose, and really have a significant impact the way that Interface has. And so I'm curious, what has been your own personal journey with that curiosity, skepticism, and what made you, I'm also curious, what made you decide to take that leap, if there was that possible doubt or question in your mind when you're in the nonprofit world?
There's a couple layers to that question. So I'll start with like fundamentally, I think it's hard to deny that every large business model is extractive, is destructive. Purely just from an environmental and natural resources standpoint, I mean, we don't have an example to counter that, right? I'm not going to belabor, the human resources questions here, or the, what's going on in global supply chains that we can't track, that maybe we are founded upon some really ugly truths, right? But we'll leave that for another day. Just from an environmental perspective, right? Just from a climate perspective, we need to establish a business model that can operate at least somewhat equivalently to how we have done business for the last, depending on where you want to start counting, 250 years or so, right? But not have a kind of linear positive relationship to more environmental degradation. It's that simple. And in the nonprofit world, personally, I struggled with the reality that my amazing nonprofit, and I'll give it a shout out here, it's called South Face, based in Atlanta, awesome organization, continuing to do awesome work today, a regional, really. And in certain kind of sectors of like building science nerds, super influential, right? They do great research, awesome case studies. They've led the charge on things like, LEED, and great, really great impact and legacy. But I really struggled with, I think, a reality, which is that all of South Face's work aggregated together in terms of energy efficiency and education and improving code for a year or 5 years or 10 years would be dwarfed by the absolute emissions avoided by one small change in a major global supply chain, like from a Walmart.
Yeah.
And so what I was really struggling with, and what I continue to be curious about, is whether we can alter enough in those massive kind of mega business models, or at least some equivalent kind of scale, right? Or some scale approaching that could actually have environmental benefit and be positive. Because ultimately those models are not slowing down or changing without it being clear that they can continue to survive and kind of drive value in various ways. And so I began to get really curious about the kind of incorporation strategies of companies versus nonprofits, and how do you make that decision, and why wouldn't you always just incorporate as a nonprofit? Because I'm sure I would always create a business that has some sort of mission, right? That's literally how I thought. And so when you start to ask those types of questions, especially in Atlanta, and especially coming from kind of built environment sustainability, which I was, you run into interface really quickly. And I didn't have doubts that the interface story was real. I was for sure curious, but I still have doubts that most businesses are even potentially sustainable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we just don't have that example yet, and that's one of the things I'm really passionate about here, is trying to establish that model can exist, and we're going to prove how it's done.
Yeah. And I think that leads nicely into the other aspect of what we started talking earlier about, which is that this has been a catalyst for Nathan to create the Beyond Zero Conscious Business curriculum, to start educating people in business schools about this. And also, separately from that, creating workshops to be able to take into businesses to do that same kind of equivalent training that is actionable and being able to shift the needle, right? And I think that's what's really exciting to me, is that when we are able to infuse this knowledge, and the fact that it is accessible, the practices are available to us. It's just that there's training and learning that has to happen, commitment, obviously, a willingness, and a little bit of vulnerability, right? To do this differently. And one of the things that really struck me about my conversation with Nathan the other day was him talking about the gap between the fact that there are scholars who are interested in studying and having more case studies and being able to talk about this in a classroom setting. And then there are also businesses who are out there going, how do I make a difference? What can I do? And there's this gap that we can close, hopefully, through this education. And I think that that's part of what really excites me, even though I don't know, as you and I were chatting a little bit before we went live, because I've been focused on some of the other aspects of our rollout, I have not been as deep into the development of the curriculum as some of the rest of our team. And so I'm excited to see how that unfolds. But what I'm really just really drawn to is the practical application of that. So yeah, I think, I don't know where the question was in that, except I'm just excited.
No, it's okay. And I'm with you. And I think that, again, that's getting back a little bit to the ripple effect and how do we leverage the story and how do we build a movement around conscious business, around not just sustainability from just the environmental perspective, right? But really business with a purpose, purpose-driven models in general. And I'm grateful to Nathan, and you know, he's a friend and he's been an awesome partner. But you're right, we didn't facilitate the movie. He came to us. We just was like, sure, of course, you know, gave him all the footage we could find, but it was entirely his story and his project. We didn't have any sort of editorial, you know, control, right? But it's so important that we consider creating that next generation of leaders and instilling a different mindset, because we need fundamentally a different mindset about, again, the purpose of business, what it's for, what it can do, and therefore who it's beholden to, and what stakeholders we consider in the model itself.
Yeah, and I think that like that is really what the kind of ground, like one of the tenets of conscious capitalism is this idea that business is intended to have a purpose, like you've been saying, and that we are uniquely positioned more than any other type of entity in the world to be able to make this kind of impact. To your point of, this is what this nonprofit could do with all of its success and all of its work. And then if we were able to disrupt in this business arena in this kind of way, it dwarfs what was being done in a nonprofit setting, right? And so when we are bridging those gaps between business, both private sector, public, and then government and nonprofit, when all of those are working in harmony rather than in silos, that's when we really get to create a lot of magic. But it's about shifting that consciousness in the arena of capitalism and business, I think. And I think that that's something that Interface is really taken the lead on and continues to last night, as I was thinking about this conversation, I was like, trailblaze, but I don't know if that has connotations that might not, like.
Yeah,
I was like,
no, I think that's okay. I think that's okay. It's better than pave the way. Think about it that way.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and I think, yes, that's true. When we're at our best, that's why and how we're out in front. And I think that there's an extent to which that type of invention and innovation and creativity and that focus on designing business to be better was actually always part of Interface's kind of DNA and ethos, even before we knew how to spell sustainability, which is kind of what we say. I think you'll get a little bit of a sense of that even from the film as well. So I hope people can join us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. I appreciate you also continuing to bring back the conversation to the idea that like sustainability and environmental impact is just one part of this conversation, and obviously the focus of what Beyond Zero is doing, but like really recognizing that this is a bigger conversation about conscious business practices and really being able to make an impact. So I'm curious, what is something that like you wish that people would ask you about the work that you do that no one ever does and that you would love to share with people?
I guess I think that we have a lot of market-facing sustainability messages, right, and ways to try to help people understand what we've done, and some of it is equivalent to a lot of other types of claims, and some of it is different. But I think there are some metrics that we're not asking questions about that I think we need to ask, like how much carbon goes into the air per dollar of revenue made, right? That's something that we report in CDP, but nobody's evaluating companies in a serious way based on their actual carbon emission intensity, right? Yeah. I should be super proud that my company has only 15,000 metric tons total globally of scope 1 and 2 emissions, you know? Like that's a tiny amount, but nobody knows because nobody knows raw numbers. And so nobody knows how to compare that. And that's okay. I'm not like, we're not going to win business because of that anytime soon, but those are the types of metrics I think. And then we have another one that I'm really proud of, which is that over 50% globally for everything that we make of our full supply chain comes from either recycled or bio-based ingredients, which means we have a long way to go, but it also means that we have dramatically decreased the extraction required to produce the product that makes our business go, right? And that's not just carpet, that's resilient flooring, which includes rubber flooring and LVT. And that's something I'm really proud of. And you can see there are other kind of environmental metrics that we track that prove why that's so important and why that has such a big impact on climate. You know, our climate our climate reporting or our carbon footprint of products. But those are things that I'm really proud of. But you know, they don't come up even with our customers very often, because those kind of global metrics and those big picture things are not where we tend to take the conversation, like land it on product level sustainability stuff. What are your certifications? What is maybe the footprint of that particular product? Those things are all important too, but like it's easier to answer that question for products than it is to make all of your products perform in such a way that even your company metrics are now changing dramatically, right? And that's where I think you actually can see the difference with who we are and what we do.
Yeah, and I just love that Interface continues to be transparent and lead the way in those conversations, because yes, they may not come up in conversations with your customers much yet, but hopefully as we continue to have these conversations more and more, again, it shifts that focus, it shifts the consciousness, that it becomes the norm. And those are things that we go, why weren't we measuring this? This is silly that we weren't measuring this all along, right?
That's right.
So yeah. I appreciate all of your time. You've been very gracious about spending time in your very busy week before you hop on a plane and join us in Chicago for the event. For those who don't know, our event is happening on Thursday, February 29th, and it is the Chicago premiere of the award-winning documentary Beyond Zero, which is also the kickoff of us being able to roll out the conscious business curriculum across the state of Illinois. And so we hope that you can join us. There are some links in the comments of the different places that this is streaming, so you can grab up information if you would like to. And is there anything else that we should leave the audience with, Joey?
No, I just encourage everybody to be asking the question, what are we doing all this for? You know, what's the purpose of business and what do you want it to be for? Because ultimately, there's no such thing as a law of economics. We made it all up. So, you know, we have a lot more control than we give ourselves credit for. And that should be very empowering. So yeah, thanks for your time, Cassandra. Thank you to the Chicago chapter of Conscious Capitalism. We're really thrilled to be co-hosting. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person and being there on Thursday evening. So come out if you can join us. We'd love to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.